Appreciate it. That was quite an intro. What I want to talk with you this morning is really about what I think is one of the more important, valuable, useful skills that any of us can have in today's challenging times, and that's the skill of negotiation, of getting to yes, of trying to reach agreement with others. And as I've been in this field ever since I was a graduate student up the way here at Harvard many years ago, I've had a kind of like a front seat view on something that I call a revolution that actually accompanies the knowledge revolution, the information revolution of which Google is a part, which is a more silent revolution, but it's a revolution in the way in which we as individuals or organizations or societies make decisions. Because typically a generation or two ago, the main way in which people made decisions was people on the top of the pyramids of power, gave the orders, and the people on the bottom simply followed the orders. And now, thanks to the information revolution, those pyramids of power are starting to collapse into organizational forms that more resemble networks, flatter forms, more horizontal forms. And as that shifts, the form of decision-making shifts from vertical to horizontal, and another name for horizontal decision-making is negotiation, is getting the yes. So that to get our jobs done nowadays, we're literally dependent on dozens, hundreds, thousands of individuals, organizations, over whom we exercise no direct control. If we want to get to yes with them, we have to negotiate. So let me just actually ask you, if you don't mind, a few quick questions about your own negotiating experience. Because if you think about it, what I'm interested in is, what stops us from getting to yes? So let me just ask you to think about your own experience for a moment here and ask yourself the question of, if I were to define negotiation very simply and very broadly as trying to reach agreement with someone, you have some interests which maybe you hold in common, like an ongoing relationship with a customer, and some interests which maybe are in tension with each other, like you'd like to get more money for your contract for Google, and maybe they'd like to pay you less. Who do you find yourself negotiating with in the broad sense of the term in the course of your day? Just if you wouldn't mind just calling it out. Who do you negotiate with?
Spouse.
Your spouse. Okay, we'll start with the hard ones there. Your children. Okay. Who else? Your what?
Colleagues.
Your colleagues. Okay. Who else? Your what? Internal teams, right. Anybody? What was that? CMOs. Okay. CMOs. Who else?
My teenagers.
Your teenagers. Okay. So, it's at home, it's at work. Now, if you were to kind of make a ballpark estimate of how much of your time do you spend, broadly speaking, in the course of your day, engaged in the process of back and forth communication, trying to reach agreement with your teenagers, your spouse, your colleagues, your clients, your suppliers, your boss, the internal partners, and so on, what percentage of your time do you think it would be? What fraction of the time, if you had to give it a certain percentage? What would you say?
That was
Half, yeah. How many would say it's, how many would agree with that? It's at least half. Okay. So that's, we don't always think of it, formally as negotiation, but in the informal sense, we're engaged in this process from the time we get up in the morning with our spouse, teenagers, kids, and so on, to the time we go to bed at night. And so let me just ask you a couple other questions. I mean, you think about, would you say, so maybe looking at the past, say, 5 or 10 years of your work career, would you say that the amount of time that you spend negotiating, has it stayed pretty steady? Does it go down over time as you get maybe more authority in your job? Or does it go up? What would you say? How many say it's going up? Okay, almost all of you. So that's the negotiation revolution in form. And I've traveled around the world, and every country around the world I see this revolution taking place in the way in which we make decisions. More and more negotiation, and
Even in Russia.
even in Russia, even in Russia, a little slower in Russia, but even in Russia, yeah, no, absolutely. There's the change. Well, I used to go to Russia back in the days of the Cold War, and it's even though change has been slow sometimes, it's changed a lot since those days. There's a lot more negotiation going on. In fact, getting the yes, I remember when it first came out, so there were some Russian friends who wanted to translate it into Russian, but they thought negotiation was subversive. They didn't want to teach people how to negotiate because then they would challenge authority. So, but now there are Russian editions of it. So, one thing that I think might be useful just for the next, we've got this hour together here, is if you have in mind at least one challenging negotiation that you're currently facing. Something, it might be just for yourself. It might be with your teenager, or it might be with your customer, it might be an internal negotiation with the CMO, or whoever it is. Have in mind some challenging negotiation. Okay, everyone got at least one in mind? So let me ask you a quick question then about the one you just selected. There are maybe two types of negotiations we engage in: the internal negotiations inside the organization, with our colleagues and coworkers and so on. And then there are the external negotiations, let's say with clients, for example, or suppliers. How many of you, just out of curiosity, have just selected an external situation? External. Okay? How many of you selected an internal situation? Okay. Obviously, and if just out of curiosity, if you had to say which one was harder, the negotiation inside or the negotiation outside, if you had just to make a broad generalization, which personally do you find more challenging? Internal negotiations or external? How many would say external? Okay. How many would say internal? Okay, great majority. I mean, obviously both can be challenging, but the great majority of hands go up on internal, which is interesting. That oftentimes we experience the more challenging negotiations as being the ones with the people with whom supposedly we're on the same team, working for the same mission, whatever. But those are often more challenging. Well, over the years, my passion over the years has been helping people, get to yes, individuals, organizations, societies, as Brian was mentioning, even in warlike situations. And the thing that sort of struck me over the years is when my colleagues and I wrote Getting to Yes, the most frequent question we got for a while was, yeah, but how do you get to yes with people who don't want to get to yes? How do you deal with people who are kind of rigid and they're intransigent, or they're using dirty tricks, or all kinds of things? So I kind of specialized in that for a long time. And in fact, my follow-on book was a book called Getting Past No, which was negotiating with difficult people, negotiating in difficult situations. But over the years, I began to realize that, in fact, perhaps the most difficult person we have to deal with in a negotiation, in the process of getting to yes, be it with our teenagers, our spouses, our coworkers, or our clients, is not what we think it is. It's not just the difficult person on the other side of the table, as difficult as that person can be. Actually, the biggest obstacle to us getting what we want in negotiation, curiously enough, is right here. It's ourselves. It's the person on this side of the table. It's the person we look at in the mirror, because after all, what could be more internal? It feels to me like the more internal the negotiation goes, the more difficult it is. What could be more internal than ourselves? And so our biggest opponent, actually, the person who's going to give us the most trouble often, is the person we're looking at in the mirror. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who once said, if you could kick in the pants the person who's going to give you the most trouble that day, you wouldn't sit for a month. And so to me, that obstacle can also become our biggest opportunity, if we can turn our own inner opponent, as it were, into our biggest ally. And that's really the subject of this book, my newest book, which is Getting to Yes with Yourself and Other Worthy Opponents. And where it lies to me, it lies in our very understandable, very natural human tendency to react. In other words, to act without thinking. I mean, negotiation is supposed to be goal-oriented behavior. You're looking rationally to advance your objective. But oftentimes, our own emotions, for example, get in the way. As Ambrose Bierce once said, when angry, you will make the best speech you will ever regret. And it happens a lot these days. And so the first and most important negotiation starts within. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but then I don't want to go too deep into this without really drawing you out more and getting into your own situations. But just to highlight a couple of points here from this. To me, interestingly, the foundation of being able to get to yes with yourself is the ability to step back from the situation, and I like to use the metaphor of going to the balcony. It's almost like you're negotiating with the other person on a stage. Part of your mind goes to a mental or emotional balcony overlooking that stage, where you can, it's a place of calm, of perspective, of self-control, where you, above all, can keep your eyes on the prize. For example, these days, there's so much going on in our lives. We get texts, we get emails, we get calls. There's so much information flooding in all the time. And let's just, imagine you get an email, an internal message from your organization, and you've been left out of an important decision. You kind of feel irritated, you feel frustrated, you feel pissed. So it's very tempting to just kind of compose a reply, right? And then you get the satisfaction of hitting the reply button, but you don't just hit the reply button, you hit the reply all button, and then it goes to the entire organization. And there's a button on that screen sometimes, or at least there used to be, which is the Save as Draft button. That's the button that's very rarely gets used, and you kind of compose it, you get it out of your system, you hit Save as Draft. That's the balcony button. Then you do whatever everyone has their favorite techniques for going to the balcony. It might be go for a workout, go have a cup of coffee with a friend, whatever. Take a night to sleep on it. Just take a few minutes by yourself. Whatever your technique is for going to that balcony, you're going to come back, look at that message, that email, and you're going to say, wait a minute, is this really going to advance my interest in this situation? And you're going to hit the delete button, and then you're either going to pick up the phone and call the person, or even better, get together with them if you could do that. Because it's just, when you're going to resolve a difference like that, it's much easier to do that with more ability to communicate with a voice, for example, than it is through an email. Emails lend themselves very much to miscommunication. They're great for information transfer, but not so good for handling delicate or possibly emotionally sensitive issues. So that's kind of going to the balcony. If I think about my own personal experience, Brian was asking me to tell a story too about my own personal experience. Some years ago I was involved as a third party in the country of Venezuela. And it was at a time when Venezuela, there were like 1 million people on the streets calling for the downfall of the president, who was then Hugo Chavez. And about 1 million people on the streets wanting to support him, and international observers were worried that it might turn into a civil war. And I'd been asked by President Carter to go down and meet with both parties and talk to them. And anyway, I had a number of meetings with both sides. I want to talk about one particular meeting I had with President Chavez. He liked to meet at night, so we had made a meeting at the presidential palace at 9 p.m. He was a little bit late, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. Finally, at midnight, I'm ushered in to see the president, expecting to find him all alone. Instead, I find him surrounded by his entire cabinet, and he kind of pulls up a seat, says, here, Bill, have a seat here, and tell me, what do you think of the situation? What's your impression? And how are we doing? And I said, Mr. President, I've been talking to some of your ministers here. I've been talking to the opposition, and it seems to me making some progress. He said, what do you mean progress? Are you blind? Are you naive? What are you, foolish? You're not seeing the dirty tricks the other side, those traitors on the other side are up to? He proceeded to get furious, and he leaned in very close to my face and proceeded to yell at me for, I'd say, approximately 30 minutes. Now, you put yourself in my shoes for a moment. You imagine, I'm thinking, well, hey, that's not true. We're not foolish. He's not seeing this. I'm wanting to defend myself, but I was able to go to the balcony for a moment. And actually, one little technique that helped me go to the balcony was a friend of mine, I don't know, a few months earlier, had said, Bill, if you're ever in a tough situation, he said, pinch the palm of your hand. And I said, Hernan, why would I pinch the palm of my hand? And he said, well, because that'll keep you alert. Maybe it'll keep you a little more alert. So at that moment, for whatever reason, I remembered to pinch the palm of my hand. And because at that mind, in terms of thinking about it, I was thinking, wow, 2 years of work all down the drain. You go through all these things. And I'm sure if you're tough, customer calls, sometimes you can literally, you think you might be losing that important customer and so on. So so at that moment, I just was able to go to the balcony, not react, because if I had reacted, I mean, President Chavez was famous for giving 8-hour speeches. I mean, that, the conversation could go way off the rails, and that might have been the end. But by not reacting, by going to the balcony, by listening instead, I was able to listen, just kind of clear my mind, because, I was able to observe myself from the balcony, just note the thoughts and feelings that are going through me, just, okay, that's fine. Now let me pay attention to President Chavez, and just give attention to him and try and figure out what was going on for him. I mean, why was he yelling at me? What was going on? Was this some kind of show for the cabinet and so on? What was irritating him so much? And sure enough, by just listening to him, he began, he could have gone on forever, but since I wasn't reacting, after about a half an hour, he started to run a little bit out of steam. Even he did. And then I saw, if you just watch body language, I saw his shoulders sink a little bit, and in a very kind of weary tone of voice, he said to me, "So, Yuri, what should I do?" That is the sound of a human mind opening. Before that, if someone's angry with you, like it's your spouse, your teenager, or whatever, it's very hard to use reason with someone who's in a highly emotional state of mind. It's like beating your head against a stone wall. But by listening, he kind of went into a different emotional phase of kind of like, okay, so what should I do? And I said, Mr. President, this is December. Christmas is coming up. Last Christmas, all the festivities around the country were canceled. No one had any fun because of this conflict. Why don't just declare a truce? Give everyone a chance to go to the balcony for a few weeks. Enjoy the family with their holidays, and maybe when they come back in January, everyone will be in a better mood to kind of listen and see if we can make some progress. He said, "Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to propose that in my next speech." And then his mood completely shifted. He said, and over Christmas, I think I'd like you to come with me and actually see around the country, and you come with me. And then he said, for a moment, he said, "Wait, if you're always with me, maybe you won't be seen as a neutral anymore." But he said, "That's no problem. I'll give you a disguise." Complete shift. How? Because I had been able to get to yes in a sense with myself, my own, restrain my own, natural reaction to defend myself or to get into it would have gotten no use to get into an argument with the president of Venezuela. I was able to go to the balcony, and then I was able to kind of shift that situation. Just one example. Let me ask you, just if I may, what techniques you use to go to the balcony in your very busy, hectic lives, either work or personal? What do you do to go to the balcony? Anybody?
Sleep on it.
You sleep on it, okay. Go for a walk.
Fresh air.
Fresh air, yeah. Anything else?
I definitely draft emails but save them.
You draft emails and then save them, right? Save as draft, okay.
Talk to a colleague.
Talk to a colleague, yeah. Someone else can be your balcony. Okay, good. Let me, if I may, just give you one more story, and then I really want to, I want to see what's on your minds and open it up to conversation here and see what kind of questions you've got. But this conversation that I met with President Chavez was, about 10, 12 years ago. But a more recent one that I got involved in, which was a business conversation, was about a year and a half ago. The wife and daughter of a very prominent Brazilian entrepreneur got in touch with me. He was the founder of Latin America's largest retailer, really, and built up this business from nothing. He was a billionaire, and he had sold half of his company to a French, also billionaire, president of a very large French conglomerate. And they'd worked together for some years, and then they'd had a falling out, and so they were fighting over control. And Abilio was the name of the person I went to see, and he was like 76 at the time. He was going to be chairman of the board for another 8 years. 2.5 years of just sheer battle. I mean, every lawyer you could imagine. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of lawyers, arbitration suits. It was all over the papers. I think the Financial Times called it perhaps the biggest cross-continental boardroom showdown in recent history. I mean, it was not just affecting the immediate parties, but their families, 150,000 employees of the company. It was even straining Brazil-French commercial relations. Anyway, so I sat down with Abilio. I didn't know if I could help, but I sat down with him in his living room there in São Paulo, and I asked him to tell me his story, and he told me the story, and then I realized, you know, there's always this negotiation with the other side, and that's extremely difficult. But as I was saying, sometimes even more difficult is a negotiation inside ourselves. And what I could sense inside Abilio was he wasn't sure whether he wanted just to continue to fight. He was a fighter naturally. You know, let's fight and fight. Or did he really want to reach an agreement? And sometimes, you know, we're also torn in a lot of these situations. What is it we want to do? So I asked him, you know, Abilio, what do you want? You know, how can I help you? What do you really want here? And he had a ready answer to that. He said, okay, I want the stock at a certain price. I want elimination of the non-compete clause. I want company real estate. And he had named 5 or 6 other things. Give me a laundry list of what he wanted. He was clear about what he wanted. But to me, that's just the beginning of because oftentimes we think we know what we want, but we don't know what we really want. So I asked him, but Abilio, you know, you're a man who's got everything. You've got your own private plane. You can fly everywhere around the world. You got your new family. You got everything. You know, is this really what you want to do with your life? Is get involved in, you know, big dispute? I mean, what do you really want? What do you most want in your life right now? Anyway, he kind of struggled with that question for a while, but then after a bit, he finally said to me, you know what I want? I want my freedom. Freedom, that's what I want. And I said, so what does freedom mean to you? He says, well, it's freedom to pursue my business dreams, my business deals, and so on, and I want free to spend time with my family. So once we'd gotten down to that level, you know, and oftentimes that's what we need to do inside of ourselves, ask ourselves, what is it truly that's important to us? What's the prize? From the balcony, that's what we do. Then it turned out, once it was clear, you know, then I could ask a follow-on question. I could ask Abilio the kind of question like, okay, so you really want your freedom. Who can give you that freedom? Who can give you that sense of freedom, the thing you most want in the world? Who can give that to you? Is it your adversary, you know, the former business partner? Is that the only person who can give you your freedom? You're total hostage to him? Or at least to some extent, can you yourself give yourself that sense of freedom? And that kind of like opened up a possibility. He said, okay, yeah, well, maybe I can give myself that freedom. So there was this kind of a psychological antecedent there inside himself. He said, well, I could go ahead and pursue business deals regardless of what this other guy's doing. I can go spend time with my family on a holiday. And he proceeded to do those things. And paradoxically, by doing that, he was psychologically less dependent on the other side. And it actually made it easier for me then when it came to trying to find a resolution with the other side. And as it turned out, this huge, colossal, titanic struggle that all these lawyers were doing, I met with the other side in Paris on a Monday in a restaurant there. And the representative of the other side said, so why are you here? And I said, you know, because life's too short. Life's too short for these kinds of like lose-lose struggles, because that's what often happens in battles is, you know, each side's trying to win. It's a win-lose struggle, but in the end what happens is everyone ends up losing. And you know, it's affecting everyone. So he said, so how would you settle this? What's your proposal? And I said, well, if we can just agree on 2 principles, I think maybe we can make some progress. He said, what are those? I said, freedom for each individual. Let them go on with their lives. We'll figure out a way to free them from this struggle. And dignity. You know, because everyone wants respect. He said, so what would that mean? And he called me back in his office the next day, and you know, we looked at it, and like on one piece of paper, we set down what would be some terms that would tangibly reflect freedom for each individual and dignity. That was on a Tuesday. By Friday, we had both men in a law office in São Paulo signing the contract, resolving the whole dispute. Joint press conference. They went then made a talk to all the employees of the company together, wished each other well in the future, and it was all over. And that night, actually, there was a dinner held by my client for I think there were about 40 lawyers who just arrived in Sao Paulo for an arbitration lawsuit, and just from all over the world, from New York, from Paris, from the Middle East, or whatever, the best lawyers in the world, and they were out of a job, as it were. So I'm just giving you as an example that here again, seemed like a very complicated dispute, but it really starts within us often. And so this new book of mine is about how do we get to yes with ourselves in order that we can get to yes with others. It's almost as if I've realized that we've been negotiating, these days we need all the tools we can get in negotiation. And it's almost like we've been negotiating with one arm tied behind our back, because we've just been focused on outer influence. How do we influence the other side? And we've neglected sometimes our ability to influence ourselves, who after all is our best instrument for influencing others. And so we can negotiate with both arms together. So that's the essence of this book. But at this point,